Today on the Sound Health Podcast, you're using sound as one of the main cues.
Absolutely. Right.
That's an incredible idea. I hadn't considered that, and it makes complete sense.
Right. The timbre of the voice.
Yeah.
Right. That totally changes. It's like the difference of, hearing the William Tell overture that gives you that very bucolic feel and open air and sunrise versus, Darth Vader's theme.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It gives a totally different feel to you. And that's how, people say, oh, I can't be around that person. They bring me down. Well, yeah, because how they're interacting is so different, right? They have the Darth Vader theme going on instead of the William Tell overture.
Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to take advantage of a free resource I made for you. It's called the Sound Health Newsletter. In it, I share the latest research in music and health. Plus, you'll learn music and wellness exercises that you can use every day to feel your best. Just come visit me at donovanhealth.com to get started today. That's donovanhealth.com. Hey there, this is Jim Donovan. Welcome to the show. I am glad you're here. Today we have a very special guest, a good friend of mine, Dr. Russ Miller. Dr. Miller is a family physician with special interest in behavioral health, geriatrics, Lyme's disease, and complementary and alternative medicine. And he's also one of my favorite people in the whole world. Dr. Miller, nice to see you. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well.
And I think I'm going to call you Russ. Is that all right?
That's great. Yep. Went to school for the knowledge, not the title.
Exactly. So what have you been up to today?
Pretty relaxed day today. Was doing a lot of sort of paperwork stuff and then traveling out here to do this. And had a good afternoon with my wife, just sort of tooling around and hanging out.
Nice. Yeah, she's a super nice lady. We all had dinner together before we came over. And
I'm pretty partial to her.
Yeah, she's very sharp, keeps you in shape. I watched her.
Yes,
I watched
she
her
does.
working her magic on you. I have a wife that does that for me, and I'm very lucky and grateful for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about all kinds of fun things today. We'll get into things about the vagus nerve, vagal tone, which is a big thing that we talk about here or on the podcast. The first thing I'm interested in is what initially drew you to medicine in the first place?
Well, Jim, I don't remember a time that I didn't want to be a doctor. One of my earliest really solid memories is probably 4 or 5 years old, visiting my grandmother in the hospital. And it didn't scare me. It fascinated me. I was absolutely enthralled by all the buzzers and whistles and how the doctors made decisions. And I was lucky enough to be in her room when the surgeon came to visit her and watch how he examined her and talked to her. And being able to unravel the mysteries while still talking to somebody and being personable with them just somehow enthralled me, I guess. So all through school, my 5th grade project in science was I had my dad outline my body on shelf paper, and I drew in the organs and colored them in.
Oh, my.
Yes, that sort of thing, right? When I got to high school, of course, I did all the science geek stuff, and as well as other geeky things like band and theater. But in my yearbook in high school, under ambition, you'll read, my ambition was to be a family physician in a rural Pennsylvania town, which, as a cautionary tale, be careful what you pray for.
You've done it.
I've done it, yes. Now, there's nothing left in my life to do. No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
But, so I considered some other things just because I felt I had to be sure that's what I wanted to do. But
Sure.
Medicine always drew me. Because of the balance, I think, of between science and the art of medicine and being able to relate to people. I think those 3 things are the draws for me that I can name over the time of my development as a doctor.
And is it like that it's a puzzle? Is that part of the allure, that each person is a puzzle?
Part of it is, yeah. I love problem solving. I love to be able to look at something and sometimes literally in my mind's eye see the pieces fall together of why does somebody come in saying virtually the same thing as somebody else, but they have a different diagnosis. That sort of problem solving, puzzle solving, but also as a family physician, doing it within the context of the person themselves.
Yeah.
That blend between, like I said, between art and science and interpersonal relationship is just why I still do what I do, and especially in today's world of medicine.
Yeah, it seems like it's growing fast. And then now you've been a physician between the time where there wasn't internet and there is.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So how's that impacted your life?
Let's just say the learning curve has been nearly vertical most of my career.
Okay.
And so I started, like, my last year in medical school was when email actually was just introduced, and as an intramural within the institution itself. Email, there was not really email outside of the institution.
Okay, right.
So that's, I
Like
mean,
mid-90s?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, 94 I graduated medical school.
Okay.
And so up until about 10 years ago, I still had paper charts, and I was one of the early adapters in the rural area of using a full-on, I'd say 95% paperless EMR, electronic medical record. And so yeah, it keeps you on your toes. There's good things and bad things about the technology, but that's any tool that you use has a good side and dark side.
Sure.
It's been an interesting ride. And it's interesting because I teach medical students quite often and other health professionals, and trying to get them to understand that it is a tool and that your real reason for being there is with the person who's in front of you, and not getting so enthralled with the technology that you miss the person. And there's an interesting story that's told when they first started. I read about this, and it was actually related to me by a physician, an OBGYN in residency. When they first started doing fetal monitoring, the equipment took up an entire hospital room. So the laboring mother was in another room, and they ran all the cables to this room. And so the doctors are in there interpreting, oh, look, there's a contraction. They're watching the movement on the screen. And then all of a sudden this chaos starts on the screen, and they're like, what is that? We don't know what it is. What it was she was actually giving birth, and the nurse delivered the baby. That's a cautionary tale. Right? So those sort of things keep you humble about what the tool of medicine is.
And do people ever self-diagnose from the internet when they reach your office?
Oh, yes. So what I always preface this with, I am very grateful for a well-informed patient, but 2 hours on Google does not replace 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 3 years of residency, 22, almost 23 years in practice. It just doesn't, right?
Right.
Now, I say that respectfully. I'm not trying to be arrogant saying, well, I just know more than you. Well, I don't try to fix my own car. I understand the workings of an internal combustion engine because I took physics, but God help me if I had to fix it, right?
Yeah.
So that's why God created the mechanic, sort of thing is what I tell people. And they're working on something that they know. So please tell me what you think it is. But then together, let's work together to develop what it actually is. And you see that a lot with people who are very passionate about certain things.
Yeah.
And they may have a very depth of knowledge, but sometimes you miss the forest through the trees. And that's my job of looking at it as a broad thing and then reducing it to what it could be.
I like that. That's a balanced way to think about it, because I know I do it all the time. If I don't feel well, I'm looking it up. I'm looking up exactly what things could be happening. And then I feel informed, but then I also read all the things it could possibly be. And then sometimes I get to be a hypochondriac about it and think that I've got 4 different things that I don't actually have.
Yeah, I call it noophobia. I'm terrified of what this could be. It's like, well, I could have the common flu, or I have, leprosy. Like, yeah, okay. No, how about we, pare that down a little bit and draw you back from the edge and work through it. So
yeah,
and like I said, I appreciate an informed patient, but it's still a team effort between the physician and the patient, and trying to get that sort of rapport is very important, I think, in the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, you and I both grew up in rural areas. You still practice in a very rural area. Mm-hmm. When I grew up, a lot of the folks around me really value self-sufficiency. Like, we're going to just get it done. We tough out things. We're okay maybe sometimes with some suffering.
Yes.
Like there's maybe a stubbornness around there and just a lot of grit and toughness in these people. Many of them have been through lots of challenging things through their lives. And maybe, especially the older folks, have seen some really intense things that we could never imagine. In your experience, do you find that some of those people kind of carry over some of the old ways from the places that maybe their ancestors came from, like the old old like complementary medicine remedies or things like that?
Sure, yeah. What you describe, I shorthand with the phrase rugged individualism.
Rugged individualism.
Yeah,
That's a much better term.
Yeah, they're rugged individualists, and which is great. To have the old term is moxie, to have that moxie to withstand things. Sometimes they're their own worst enemy because they wait too long. But there are some remedies that people use. Still, there's for the common things like warts or minor cuts and abrasions and things. The one that comes to mind is black salve, right? And it can be made from coal tar, which has been banned now, or pine pitch, and it's used a lot. And some people still make. There's a family who closely guards their recipe that has been passed down since like the 1700s in the area, which is really cool. But it's used as a drawing salve. If you get a splinter or something, you put black salve on it, and in the morning it pops out and it does have some medicinal properties. And there's a lighter form of it, a pine pitch, or a pine sap rather than pine pitch salve that's used almost like a Vicks. On chest and throat when somebody has a cold. So those sort of things still exist. People.
I thought you said Black Sabbath at first.
Oh, no, not Black Sabbath.
And I'm thinking,
rock on.
That would work. Put my foot up to that thing, and it'll just blow everything right out.
No, Black Salve. Yeah, sorry, I'll enunciate better. But no, they'll do things like that. And there's some, one of the stories I like, this was not my own patient, but actually a chiropractor in the area had a woman, and she was this was in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and she was in her early 90s, and he's examining her, and he noticed that her pulse was very irregular. And he's like, you need to go to the doctor.
Okay.
And, your heart's, there's something wrong with her. So the next time she comes in 2 weeks later for her adjustment, and he's like, oh, took her pulse and blood pressure, and oh, hey, everything's nice and smooth. You went to the doctor? She's like, no. He's like, well, what happened? She's like, well, my grandmother used to talk about making a tea from fairy thimbles, which is another name for foxglove or digitalis.
Okay.
Right? So I went out and got leaves, and I make a tea every day and drink this tea, which, it's not suggested that you treat yourself that way. As my disclaimer, please go see a physician. But that's the old treatment for it. We still use digitalis in some instances to treat irregular heart rate. And she just knew this, because it was passed down from her grandmother, which would have dated, for her being in her 90s, in the 1990s, her grandmother would have been born in the middle 1800s.
Yeah.
Right? So you do have that tradition. It's sometimes hard to tease out because people are afraid to tell you until they find out, you're not going to scream at them.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's something. What about, apple cider vinegar? Does that work?
Yeah. So people, there's been an old tradition of that, certainly, but it's been resurrected with it being on the internet of using apple cider vinegar. And sure, it can help, especially things with heartburn, because the body senses increased acid, so it stops making so much acid itself.
I see.
Sort of thing. People swear by putting raisins in apple cider vinegar and then drinking the extract of that for rheumatism or arthritis.
Okay.
Some people swear by it. I don't have any studies that says this is awesome, but hey, if it works, it's not probably going to hurt you.
Yeah. So Bayer's probably not going to do that study anytime soon.
I would doubt that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's. I know. I grew up. My dad. He was like a quasi survivalist.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a survivalist, and we had all the remedies. And I remember him trying to get me to take honeycomb for my allergies and all these different things. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. And then lo and behold, I started using local raw honey,
right.
And the allergies aren't gone, but they reduced from a month long of misery to maybe a week.
Right.
Which
is a homespun thing of what allergists actually do when they desensitize people by giving them increasing doses of an allergen.
So Dad, if you're listening, you were right. About a lot of things, sir.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about something I know that you're familiar with. You work with a lot of older adults, and many of them have chronic pain. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what's happening in the body, what's happening in the brain when someone has just chronic pain.
Well, certainly, chronic pain is interpreted by different receptors in the body, of course. But if somebody, which is the really minute way of looking at it is talking about receptors and whatever. But the broader way of looking at it is somebody's experiencing pain, and I always approach a patient from the idea of that they are a triune, their body, mind, and spirit, and they're all interconnected. So if the body is hurting, it affects the other two spheres. If the mind is hurting, it affects the other two. Everything can intertwine with one another. And so if somebody is in chronic pain long enough, it affects their mood. It affects their, it actually changes their brain chemistry and their body chemistry. It makes them more susceptible to illnesses of an infectious kind, infectious disease, because of reducing their immune system. There's all this interconnectedness of the body. So that's one thing. And then how do you alleviate the pain? Well, there's a lot of talk about the opioid crisis, and rightly so. It is a crisis. Absolutely.
It's hit our area pretty tough.
Absolutely, yeah. And you see it all over. But part of the problem, in my mind, and having seen this, and having probably been, I will admit, be guilty of this in my practice, is, they have pain, you treat the pain, and well, whatever,
Yeah.
When you really need to dig and figure out, where is the pain coming from? Is it arthritis? Is it some form of inflammation? And I subscribe to the inflammatory theory of disease, that all disease arises from some form of inflammation.
Okay.
And that will keep that in mind, because we'll be talking, I'm sure, about that later. But you also have to think that, you have pain, but what is it doing to you psychically and socially, and how does that amplify the pain that you're having?
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to look at treating a depression and anxiety about pain, because it's making the pain worse, right? So that's part of the cause. So
if I'm anxious, my pain increases.
Correct. Yeah. So your interpretation, your perspective of pain increases. If you're relatively not anxious, relatively in a positive mindset, I can deal with it. Yeah, it's there, but I'm not suffering with it.
So it's more the perception of pain than the pain actually changing. How do I understand
Well, in part. Okay, so there's certainly pain. There is a physical phenomenon of pain.
Yeah.
But so two people have similar conditions that cause similar levels of pain. And one deals with it very well, and one deals with it more poorly. And you can usually trace that to perspective.
Okay.
Their mindset, their level of anxiety, how they view their pain, how they view, this is the most horrible thing that's ever happened to me, their pain's going to be worse. If it's like, this is part of living, and you keep going and I'll figure out what's wrong and try to do something about it. Which also speaks to, when you're talking about pain, if somebody comes to you really in pain and they think that there's nothing to be done for it, their pain is going to be greater.
I see.
But if you can engage them and say, no, we can try and figure out what's going on, just doing that can sometimes change their perspective. And it's like, okay, if I could say to them, I need to do tests, we need to figure out what this is causing this. It's going to take about 2 weeks to do all of this. Can you tolerate this with whatever treatment until then? Oftentimes they'll say, absolutely, I know we're working on it, so I can deal with it, right? So that perspective change is really important.
And this is something that the internet's not going to tell you to do that.
No.
They're not going to see your level of pain. They won't be able to assess it for you. And then to ask you those kinds of questions to maybe help your psyche calm down a little bit, so that that perception of pain can drop a little bit. Because if I'm anxious, that perspective of pain increases. If I'm stressed out, if I'm speaking poorly to myself, I'm so sick, I hate this, and all these different things that we might say to ourselves, sometimes we can be our own worst enemy.
Right. One of the phrases that happens quite often in a pain syndrome, somebody comes in and says, I have this pain. Nobody seems to even believe that I'm doing it. I must be nuts. Mm-hmm. And just being able to talk to somebody, well, tell me, what are you calling pain? What are you, and validating that they're actually experiencing something that's real, helps them start to be able to approach it from a different point of view. Part of that is, especially in the rugged individualistic society culture that I practice in, people are expected to suck it up and deal with it. And that's not always in their best interest. Yeah. And to have a different paradigm, a different worldview, to be able to work them into and say, okay, yes, you have pain, there's reason for it, but we're doing something about it. These are things you can do for yourself, and giving them a bit of empowerment maybe having to use opioids, maybe not. That becomes trying to make the medicine part of it almost secondary to other things that they're doing, and saying, well, if you can exercise to whatever degree, that's helpful. Are you eating healthily? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you all the things that they can do that hopefully gives them a sense of empowerment can help a lot too. Not trying to belittle the fact that they have a pain syndrome, but trying to get them to participate in their care rather than being a victim of the pain.
Right, and passively experiencing the whole thing.
Correct.
And what you're doing, again, you won't get this from the internet, is that you're caring for their psyche, and you're being compassionate with them, which that mode of suck it up is very not compassionate to yourself.
Right.
Even though I get it, like I understand where it comes from, and I understand that we had much tougher times at back in the day,
right,
where there wasn't any help, there wasn't any medicine, maybe, and so I can see where it comes from, but then to just let that be the worldview,
right,
ongoing, like you're saying, we become our own worst enemy.
I think that might come from a twisted stoicism. A twisted Stoic philosophy. So, Stoicism is commonly thought of as, well, punch me and I won't flinch, right? And that's not really the thing. And I tell people this quite often. I use this spiel, as I call them, for my patients quite often, saying, sometimes there's a Stoicism that you have to adopt to a degree. And that's not punch me and I won't flinch. It's play the hand dealt you, but play it as well as possible.
Yeah.
Right? And there again, that is an active participation in what's happening to them, rather than saying, oh, this is happening to me, there's nothing I can do about it. Well, yeah, there is always something. You have a choice, even if that choice is only, what is your perspective?
Sure.
To start with, right?
Well, besides abusing opioids or besides stoicism, are there any other mistakes that you see some of your patients make when it comes to managing pain?
Absolutely. Self-care is one of the biggest things. And I listen, sleep, nutrition, time for self, not the idea that I have to just keep going and do for appearances. It's the thing of having to step back and saying, what do I need to do for myself with this? Allowing yourself to heal, allowing yourself to deal with what's in front of you rather than pushing it under and worrying about everybody else. Or, unfortunately, the reality is people work and they have to keep working, so they may not be able to take time off all the time.
Yeah.
But when they're not working, I have to do this at home. Well, do you have to do that? Or could somebody else do it? And again, that rugged individualism that they just have to keep doing. You keep it up for appearances. You don't show weakness, and it's really detrimental to them. And
that's a mindset.
Right. One of the biggest things that just drives me up a wall is that people almost take a pride in how little they sleep. Right.
Yeah.
And I have people say, I can sleep when I'm dead. Well, you're going to be doing that sooner instead of later.
Unfortunately.
And our body heals during sleep. Our psyche heals during sleep. All those things, it takes time. You're not doing nothing by sleeping. You're actually making yourself better in order to function at a better capacity when you're awake. And again, perspective. If we can change that perspective a little bit, I think people would be healthier in all those three realms I talk about.
And that requires time. When you're in an appointment, and you've got a bunch of appointments, backed up into each other, you have to take the time with those people to explain these things, almost maybe even sell them on it, to kind of get through these maybe outdated ways of thinking about stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Thinking about things.
But it's worth the time, because if I spend that time in one appointment and they start to make a change in how they think about things, when they come into other appointments, they'll say, hey, you told me X, Y, or Z. This is what I thought about it. This is what I did. Did I do good? And it makes future appointments more, expedient's not the word, but more effective, I guess. And they start to develop that team, patient-doctor relationship is really a team relationship. When I was in med school in the 90s, we were still fighting against the idea of paternalistic medicine. We'll do it because I'm the doctor and I'm telling you to do it.
Right.
And what I'll do is say, okay, you have these choices to do. You can do this, this, or this. And personally, from knowing you and seeing what I'm saying, this is what I would suggest, and go through these options and talk about them. And at the end, I'll say, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any questions about it? Answer any questions they might have and say, well, what do you want to do? And occasionally I'll still get, well, you're the doctor. What do you think I should do? Well, yeah, but these are all valid options. I'm not living in your skin. What are you going to do for yourself? Because I could tell you to do a lot of things and you'll walk out of here and do none of them.
Yeah.
Right. So trying to get them to participate in their own care. That's another thing that I wish people would do for themselves.
Yeah.
Again, get away from the passiveness.
That's helpful. And that's a lot of what we do on this show is always offer things that people can do.
Right.
Right. The natural, whether it's a breathing technique or some sort of musical device that we can do together, an exercise that we can do together, but not just to passively accept that, the way I feel right now is just the way it is. That perhaps there's another way that you've not tried yet, and we try to offer those.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing. People know what they know, right?
Yeah.
And if you offer them a broader view of it and teach, I tell people all the time, the root of the word doctor is docere, to teach, right? And I can teach until I'm blue in the face. If they choose not to learn, that's up to them. But I will try to offer choices for them. And again, giving them a sense of empowerment. They can choose to do it or not. But changing that mindset, getting out of that, you're going to do something to me. No, I'm going to do something for you if you'll allow me to.
Yeah, right? and with you.
And with you, right. And that's the other thing. That's one of the beautiful things about family medicine is that you have what's called longitudinal care, over years' time. And I tell people, especially if they have a bad diagnosis, we'll walk with you through this, right? And it's, it's sometimes hard for people to accept that. Accepting help is against the rugged individualist mindset.
Yeah, I got this. I got it. I'm all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that one. Speaking of changing mindset, I know this reason this podcast exists is because music does that.
Absolutely.
It does it for so many different things. And I'm just wondering, with regards to pain, is there anything you can tell us about how music helps, if at all?
Well, sure. I mean, the way I view, again, recreationally or recreationally, we recreate ourselves and we need to do that at times. Taking time to do things that relax you, taking time to things that feed your spirit. Music certainly does that. Reading does that. Walking in nature does that. Oftentimes I'll prescribe that to people. Nature's a great healer. You're having an anxiety issue or whatever, or healing from something really either devastating diagnosis or an illness that took a bad turn and you're still recovering. Get out and listen to the rhythms of nature.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, you can listen to the rhythms of music, right? So, our body responds to that. Why is it that certain songs, when you hear them again, you're back into the first time you heard them, right? Or you have the feeling of, certain songs from, whether it's sung in a religious context or in a really spiritually significant happening in your life, brings you back to that idea of experience of spirituality. Very powerful. That limbic system, emotional response to things, pretty hardwired, I think, with our experience of music and rhythm and whatever cultural things you carry with yourself. So, sure, I'll use anything to get people to feel better.
Yeah, especially that music that we've heard over and over again, whether it's in church or whether it is, maybe we have songs from our lineage, our family lineage.
Right.
I know my mother, I remember her telling me about how on Sundays when she was little, they would have an Italian feast. And then all the uncles and aunts would come over and the cousins would come over. And after the food, then the mandolins came out. And then they sang songs all day. And she remembers it as some of the best times of her life.
Right. Yeah.
And I could see how, even if I was down or I wasn't feeling well, how something like that might do the trick.
Sure. Yeah, one of my greatest childhood memories, and this is going to sound like terrible. Your parents took you to a bar, but in the small, and it's literally a village where I grew up in northern Cambria County, Pennsylvania. There was a bar and a tavern. It was named a tavern, and the son of the owner, when he was home in the summers, would play guitar on the front porch and sing all the different folksy sort of songs, and that is like one of the quintessential memories of summer. Sitting there, listening to everybody chat, and Pete playing the guitar and singing, and the fireflies are lighting. It just is such a emotionally comfortable memory, and the key to it was the music.
It draws you back,
right?
Like if you had a recording of that and you could turn it on when there was a bad day,
right?
It might kind of bring you back.
Sure, yeah,
that makes sense. One of the things I talk quite a bit about is this nerve in the body called the vagus nerve. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. Could you, for listeners that are brand new to this nerve, can you explain a little bit about some of the functions it has in the body?
Sure. So, not getting too technical, just to give a little background, the autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that carries on all the unconscious things in our body, is basically made up of three parts: the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic, of which the vagus is the largest component, and what's called the enteric nervous system, which is the gut. Okay, and all these things have an interplay, and we talk about pulses and nerves and how information moves back and forth, and we talk about that in a linear fashion, but really, in my mind, it's not linear. It's broader than that. It's like a global fashion of how these things work. And they're always talked about in terms of being in opposition to one another, but I really like to think of them as they are to maintain the balance of the body. And there's a phrase called homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis is a word that literally means same place. So homeo, same, stasis, place. And it is causing the body to stay in the place where we function the best. And so the sympathetic nervous system is known as the fight or flight part of the body, or of the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic, especially the vagus nerve, is the aphorism is the rest and digest part of that. And then the enteric nervous system is really just starting to be understood better. It's considered, it has as many or more neurons than our brain, and has a lot of different functions of sending a lot of information back to the brain, often through the vagus nerve. So that's called afferent, going back toward the brain, as about 80 to 90% of the vagus nerve is afferent, and efferent, coming from the brain to the rest of the body, is the other phrase. But the afferent going back, so there's all this information coming from our organs and our gut and things going through the vagus nerve back to the brain, and it's affecting us on very profound levels.
Kind of like a highway.
Sort of, yeah. Again, you can think of it that way. I always fight against the concept of reductionism, because it's much more complex than that, and we don't understand it fully yet. So if you reduce it to a highway, which is really two-dimensional, it's again, think of it, and it's not happening because highways happen in an orderly fashion, one hopes, because otherwise there's accidents, right?
Okay, yeah.
But this is happening like globally and almost simultaneously, right? So it's hard to wrap your head around that, because we talk about the different neurotransmitters, the chemicals that these nerves use, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, I'm sure. But they happen so quickly. Like if you're startled and you have a response to that, those are split nanoseconds that responds to. It's just remarkable how our body works that way.
And so if information's coming from the gut to the brain, is it electrical or what?
Well, yeah, electrochemical is the phrase we use.
Okay.
So there's an electrical impulse that can be measured electrically, of course, but it's really initiated by and carried by neurotransmitters, which are a chemical component that interact with the nerves in what's called synapse. Okay, that's the space between neurons, basically. It's an arc, if you will. And so these chemicals are released. Different chemicals do different things. We know, for example, the vagus nerve has a lot to do with the heart rate variability, and acetylcholine is responsible for that. Yes. So that's one particular neurotransmitter, but when certain impulses or messages get to the limbic system of the brain or the amygdala of the brain, GABA is another neurotransmitter, is going to be doing things there, but those impulses are coming from the vagus nerve too. So you can't just say it uses one neurotransmitter. Well, one particular function of it may use a neurotransmitter. So, if you want to use your highway analogy, somebody's driving a Cadillac, somebody else is driving a minibus, they're both getting to the same place, but just differently.
Yeah.
Right.
And are those made in the brain, or certain glands make those chemicals? Or do we know?
Well, it depends what chemical you're talking about. So neurons will make certain chemicals, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, GABA. Some glands make certain transmitters and hormones, basically, like cortisol, which interacts, that's the adrenal gland, or is making cortisol that has a lot to do with how we respond to stressors. And there's a feedback loop between that. So you're startled, cortisol spikes. Because cortisol spikes, other things happen in the body. So there's this whole, again, global phenomenon happens because of these things being produced.
Yeah. There was something I had talked with you about a few weeks ago, this idea of vagal tone.
Yes.
And we were talking about how, and help me make sure I understand this right, if someone's not well, so I was in the hospital last year, you know about this, and I had zero resilience to stress.
Right.
I had anxiety from basically February through June. So I had very little resilience to this. Is it the case that when people aren't well, that they have lower vagal tone? Is it accurate to say it that way?
Well, again, I guess it becomes a question of the chicken and the egg. Okay. So you're under an incredibly stressful situation, being very ill in the hospital. So the sympathetic nervous system's in overdrive. The stress hormones like cortisol are being created, and you're in a chronic state of these things.
Yes.
So not only does the vagus lack the ability to override that because there's so much stress going on, it actually may get suppressed to a degree.
I see.
Right. So the interplay in that delicate balance, that homeostatic balance of trying to keep things even between the two things gets out of whack, if you will, and that sometimes takes on its own life of its own. That it's once it's suppressed and you're not doing anything, and your body, it's almost like plowing a field. The more you plow, the deeper the furrow gets.
I see.
And so your body gets used to doing the stressful thing, and it forgets how to, quote unquote, forgets. Because we're anthropomorphizing things, but it fails to be able to exert the counterbalance to the stress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And what I wonder, just with some of the research I've done, there is, a lot of these studies talk about how things like chanting and vocal toning, like making the sound of humming,
right,
can help to kind of fortify the vagus nerve. And not only does it create chemicals that help us to feel good, but that if we do it regularly, we can actually help to, would the right word be strengthen vagal tone?
Sure. You could say it that way. Strengthen, that's a fine way of saying it. Strengthen the vagal tone, reassert the vagal tone, stimulate the vagus to return to a level of tone, almost like tuning a guitar. You're moving the tuning peg to get it into the right pitch, if you will.
It's to help the vagus help the body come back into homeostasis.
Right. But remember, like the highway analogy used, it's a two-way street, right? If the vagus isn't in balance, the body's not in balance, the body is further not in balance, the vagus isn't in balance, right? So you start trying to do things to help the vagus, which will help the body, and you do more things to the body to help the vagus, which, it just becomes this positive cycle rather than the negative cycle. So this interaction, we think of doing one thing and happening in a linear way unidirectionally, and really we have to think of it as almost a conversation between the parts of the body and the nervous system back and forth, a dialogue, rather than this happens and then this happens. Because, and again, it's useful to do a reductionist view of certain things in medicine just to explain very complex things.
Right.
But we get married to that reductionism. And we have to remember to bring it back and not miss the forest through the trees, that there's a lot going on all at once. And that there is that bidirectionality and that we, I'll give a quick example using the enteric nervous system. We're discovering chemicals and classes of chemicals that are the bacteria in our body, that's in our gut, make that is picked up as a signal basically from the bacteria to the enteric nervous system, which feeds back to the brain. And if you have not good bacteria, it may tell it to keep eating certain things that bacteria likes, like sugar and carbohydrates. If you get a better, healthier set of bacteria in it, that changes. So you can control appetites and cravings, which is fascinating. And there's again, we're in early stages of researching that, but it's fascinating that we have that symbiotic, for better or worse, relationship with these things and how it interacts with our autonomic nervous system.
Is that the same as the gut-brain axis?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, it is. The whole the brain hypothalamic, which is a part of the brain, hypothalamus and gut axis, and how the satiety center, where it tells you, okay, you've eaten enough, you don't need to eat anymore. It can be affected by how our gut is, how healthy our gut is, and part of gut health is the microbiome or the bacteria that live within it.
So maybe it's, and tell me if this is still too reductionist, that the vagus nerve it's way more than just a highway. It's like this path with thousands of different neighborhoods attached to it, with lightning speed communication between the brain and the body and the gut, all happening in split seconds.
Right. Yeah. Basically, it's just these different areas that are producing, well, if we want to bring it to music, a tone.
Yeah.
And they affect one another, and when they're in harmony, you're healthy. And when they get in dissonance, they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they're in harmony, they sound good. And when there's dissonance, there's tension.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sure.
That makes all the sense in the world. Can you tell me, so in this podcast and all of my work, I talk about sound techniques that you can use to help the vagus nerve be healthy and to help the body be healthy through that stimulation,
right.
Through strengthening vagal tone. Do you know, are there nutritional ways to strengthen vagal tone, or are there other ways to do it besides sound?
Sure. So one of a good reductionist way of looking at it, one of the things when people have supraventricular tachycardia, when the heart rate just, for whatever reason, just out of the blue starts going very fast, one of the treatments is carotid massage. Now, this should be done under medical supervision because you can faint if you do it too much, right? Okay. But if you massage the carotid artery, which is in the neck, it feeds back to the vagus nerve, which helps slow the heart, okay? Other things that do that is cold, okay?
Okay.
So when we talk about the variable heart rate, we have to realize that is an indirect measurement of vagal tone, right? So if you can return to a lower heart rate and a nice, even, regular, lower heart rate, that's telling you most likely your vagus is healthy, right?
Got it.
So it's a way of looking at that. But, things that have been researched recently, using cold, people who have this problem with the supraventricular tachycardia, one of the treatments is plunging your face in cold water.
Okay.
Because that helps reduce it too. Again, you shouldn't do this without supervision because, if you pass out in a bowl of water, that's bad.
That's bad.
That's bad, right? But there's not enough research to say that cold showers do the same thing. But we do know that when people take cold showers, it does produce certain chemicals, like oxytocin and prolactin. And these things are the sort of the bliss chemicals, the things that relax us and make us feel different, that can, feel relaxed, feel more at peace. The concern, medical concern, please, my disclaimer, if you have an issue, please talk to a physician.
Yes.
Right? But
as always,
right? But you constrict the capillaries and the extremities of the body, and that could, put too much blood back to the heart if you have a heart issue or whatever. So, I'm not saying take a cold shower and you'll feel blissed out, but it does change vagal tone using cold. Other things have been researched, like you already mentioned, singing and chanting. Interestingly enough, there's a study that seems to indicate that unison singing, like would happen in churches or synagogues or with Buddhist monks chanting, has the strongest effect. And they think that it might be potentiated because it's done in a communal setting, that you have a social contact while you're singing.
So there's the connection part, the oxytocin happening, plus the dopamine,
the
plus
vibrations, all that happening together. So
you have to send me that study. I'll write something about that.
Sure.
That sounds
Yeah.
great.
Okay. Yeah. Well, certainly, yoga there's a couple studies showing that there's not a lot of research on it, but the positioning of the body, the breathing techniques, all of that can help with apparently, and I don't doubt it, can help with vagal tone. Very similarly, Tai Chi would do similar things. Again, need to do some more research on that. Certainly meditation, especially where there's breath control and mindfulness of breathing, can help with vagal tone. Again, positive thoughts and social connections have been studied in the psychology literature, and it shows a reduction in heart rate, a reduction in blood pressure, all indicative of improved vagal tone. Deep, slow breathing, which we talk about, and we talk about that as, when somebody's having a panic attack, just getting to pay attention to their breath and slow their breathing and listen to, myself if they're having it in front of me, or somebody talking them down, helps. Laughter, it could very well be the best medicine. Mm-hmm. Again, laughter is usually within some sort of social context. If it's not, people look askance, but the deep breathing, the belly laugh, you're stimulating the gut, my guts hurt because I laugh so hard, right?
Yeah,
sort of thing. And it's a joyousness, which we don't really have enough of, I think, in the world today.
I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually someone that spreads that. So
some days.
Yeah.
Prayer has been shown of whether that is a, the standard prayer. One thing that was studied, many of the major religions have a rosary style thing, prayer beads, where things are counted. Yeah. Prayers are done in a very rhythmic manner, whether that's the Catholic rosary, Buddhist rosary, Islam has a rosary style, Orthodox Christianity has a rosary style that they use, and there's a repetitive prayer.
Yeah, like a mala beads or something.
Right, exactly, yeah. And that, again, rhythmic, right? I mean, if we really stop and think about it, we're talking about, heart rate being the indirect measurement of the vagal tone, but that is our rhythm, right? Mm-hmm. That is our internal rhythm, is the heart. And you're affecting that. And it's sort of like two tuning forks that come into tune with one another when you bring them close, right? Yeah. If you're trying to get the heart rate to come down, you use this measured rhythmic way of doing it. It's fascinating, right? There's some studies that pulsed electromagnetic fields, PEMFs. Again, I think the operative word there is pulsed, because that's a rhythm, right?
Yeah.
Again, the FDA has not approved that. It's considered like a supplemental treatment, and it's not really regulated. A lot of study needs to be done on it. I already mentioned probiotics and healthy gut bacteria, basically. Exercise. We were evolved to move, and we are far too sedentary right now. Right?
Yeah,
myself included. Massage. There's been some in the complementary and alternative medicine research. Reflexology of hitting certain points actually brings vagal tone back into balance a bit more. I'd like to see more research on that, and that's the problem. This is it's been known for years that about the healthiness of keeping vagal tone toned, but getting somebody to pay for the research and to have, a lot of these studies have very few, they studied, something like 15, 18-year-olds for one of these studies, and that's not enough sample, but it does give such tantalizing, indication that something's there to really look at. Intermittent fasting, which is a big, if you follow anything on Facebook or whatever.
I'm doing it right now.
Big deal. There you go.
Yep. Yeah. 12 to 6.
Yes. And what that probably does is, it starts changing other hormones in the body, insulin-like peptides, or glucose-like peptides, I'm sorry. Things like that start changing, and there's that feedback to the vagus nerve and to the brain itself, and all the, again, how the gut bacteria aren't being fed, so they're more quiescent at that time, so they're not affecting us the same way as, so you're exerting your natural rhythm on things. Seafood, omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA. Nerve health is based on fats. Our nerves are wrapped in fatty sheaths called myelin. For them to operate well, having healthy oils is important. Zinc, a lot of people in modern Western diets are deficient in a lot of things, zinc being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sleeping on your right side. Sleeping properly at all would be great, but for some reason, probably the way blood moves back to the body and you decrease pressure in some of the major vessels because they run on the right side of the body. Lying on that side seems to be helpful. Acupuncture has been shown to be helpful. Eating fiber because it increases the glucose-like peptides. Healthy fiber, So those are, some things other than music and rhythm that can help.
I'm doing some of these things. I'm very excited.
Okay. See, you didn't even have this talk before to know that.
This is great.
Intuitively a good thing, right?
This is why I do this podcast. I learned so much.
Yeah.
Now, I know, actually, if we could pivot for a moment,
Sure.
I know that a lot of the folks that you work with are older adults. Some of them are beginning to experience early stages of mental decline.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you can share a little bit about any preventative, non-musical things that people can do to help lower their risk for neurodegeneration.
Sure. So, not all neurodegeneration is Alzheimer's or dementia per se, but cognitive decline in general. And I tell my patients as they get older, I tell everybody, but as people get older and if they want to stay independent, I say I reduce it. Yeah, I make it simple. There are 5 things. There are 5 things that keep you independent and healthy and being able to function safely, because it's all about safety. When you get older, as long as you're safe, you can be independent. And those 5 things are nutrition, exercise, and social life. Okay? And the reason I say nutrition is because older people, especially if they're widows or widowers, and they're alone, first of all, you have the social challenge there, but also it's hard to cook for one person, especially if you've cooked for a family for, your entire marriage or whatever.
Right.
And so they fall into the habit of, or they can't get to the store. They can't physically get there, especially in the winter. They fall in the habit of like the toast and tea diet. And that lack of nutrition really, really is detrimental to their health. Yeah. And once you have that cascade, just like there's homeostasis, same place, there's a phrase that was coined by, I believe probably my one of my attendings in medical school, homeostenosis, which is the narrowing of the reserve that people have. So if your homeostasis is a pencil and the lead is that level of balance, right? The lead running, and the wood of the pencil is your reserve. As you get older, you get out to the point. The wood's almost gone, and you get out that your that narrow place of balance gets narrower and narrower, and then you fall off of it. Lack of nutrition will push you over the edge very easily. And then exercise, again, we were made to move. And if people just sit, like I tell people when they go to retire, what are you going to do? I'm going to sit on the front porch and drink beer. That's great for about a week, but you need to engage yourself, and you need to engage. And when I say exercise, it's both mental and physical.
Yes.
Because to let one or the other become quiescent is another recipe for disaster. You, as much as you can move, you move physically. As much as you can engage your mind, you do. And then socialization, connecting with people. It's all about relationship.
So going places.
Yeah.
Get out of the house.
Right.
If you're able, take an exercise class, or even turn on your computer and take an exercise class online. Go on YouTube and look up free ones. You don't need to have money to do that,
Right.
The nutrition piece is that's a huge deal. I can see that. Exercise, of course. What about musical things? Are there musical things that people can integrate, even if they're not musicians, that can help them keep their brain sharp?
Sure. I mean, I'm of the belief that you're never too old to start learning something, right? And I always want to learn play piano. Okay, well, go take lessons. You're not going to be a concert pianist at age 70, but you're learning something new. You're learning new muscle things. You're training parts of your brain. If you know somebody like Jim Donovan, go drumming. Whatever. You go. Find an area that I'm sure it's easier in a more urban area, but if there's dance classes or something of the music of the era you grew up in, that does a lot of things. It brings back memories of when you were younger and you're moving. Again, you might not be great at dancing, but you can still move, right? Join a choir. One of the studies that I mentioned before of that people singing in a choir have better vagal tone, one, because the breathing of singing and the socialization of being part of a corporate function, a choir, right? So this can be, it's remarkable. There's a part of our brain that some memories are stored, but there's another part where music seems to be stored. And there's research on that, and that people who do have dementia, and you play music from their younger years, and they brighten up, they recognize it, they start to interact with it more. So that says that there's something very, very profoundly connected in our who we are with our experience of music and rhythm. So
yeah, there's that movie Alive Inside. You can
Right.
even see clips of it on YouTube. There's a guy named Henry. I was just talking to my class about this yesterday. And Henry, African-American gentleman, sort of hunched over in his wheelchair. And to look at him, you would think, wow, this guy's, he's just gone. And then they put the headphones on, and all of a sudden, like, his head comes up and his eyes open, and he starts to sing along.
Yeah.
This is a guy who doesn't talk at all. For 10 years, he's not communicating. He's in this state. And it made, I show it to my students to help them to understand that just because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean that they're not in there.
Right. The way I talk about that is like our body is just the interface with the rest of the world. Who we are is somewhere in there, even if we're not interfacing properly.
Yeah.
And you see those glimpses every once in a while, and when somebody is struck with dementia, and it's remarkable and somehow reassuring. I think that they're still there.
Yeah, really. Now, you were talking about singing in the chorus. In your practice, do you ever notice that a person's level of health, like you can hear it in their voice? Like their voices are different when they're not healthy as compared to when they are?
Absolutely. So, again, the longitudinal relationship that a family doctor has with his patients, his or her patients, is first of all, one of the greatest draws for why I'm in family medicine.
Yeah.
And secondly, you see people at different times in their lives. And so I can walk into a room, and I've been seeing somebody for 20 years, which I have patients like that, right? Because I've been in practice like almost 23.
Sure,
That's remarkable. I can't wrap my head around the time span. But, and you walk in and say, hey, Jim, how you been? And the person answers me, oh, I'm all right. And I'll say something, and you can tell that they're down. It's just a social cue, really, right? And I said, well, how about you say that more convincingly, because it sounds like there's something wrong. And usually with something like that, the gates are open, and you find out, like, oh, I lost my job, my wife's leaving me, whatever's going on.
Yeah.
Or they're just ill. I don't know what's wrong with me. And you can tell they're worried about it. And again, recognizing that says, boy, you sound like you're really concerned. Well, I'm sick. Okay, pull back. Tell me what you mean by that. And you get them talking, and paying attention to that is really important, that those cues that people give you. I tell students, said, when you're seeing patients, you start evaluating them. If you're walking through the waiting room because you're running late and you're walking through the waiting room to get to your clinic hours, and you see a patient sitting there, take note of how they look or if they greet you. If the nurse is walking them back to the room and you happen to be in the hallway, pay attention to how they're moving, because all that speaks to where they're at in their psyche, in their health, in their physical ailments. And, to sort of bring this back to where we're talking about vagal tone, and that part of what the vagus does, it innervate the muscles around the voice box and in the neck. The gag reflex is part of that. And when somebody's voice is, they have such a tight voice, right? And that, and they're under stress, well, okay, that might be another indication of vagal tone, and that's how it's exhibiting. They're stressed, they're worried, they're in pain, they're under a lot of anxiety, whatever it is, and it changes the voice because, and all those metaphors that we use, there's a lump in my throat, the butterflies in my stomach, guts are in a knot. There's probably a physiologic reason for that, right? All this autonomic nervous system interacting with all of it. And when you're talking about voices, and that predicates that the physician must listen to the patient, not just hear what they're saying, but listen to what they're saying. That's a very subtle but very strong distinction, because that tells you something. If they're, well, I'm okay, versus I'm okay, right? That's a different thing. It should tell you something, and pursue it.
You're using sound as one of the main cues.
Absolutely, right.
That's an incredible idea. I hadn't considered that. And it makes complete sense.
Right. The timbre of the voice.
Yeah.
Right. That totally changes. It's like the difference of, hearing the William Tell overture that gives you that very bucolic feel and open air and sunrise versus, Darth Vader's theme.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It gives a totally different feel to you. And that's how, people say, I can't be around that person. They bring me down. Well, yeah, because how they're interacting is so different. Right. They have the Darth Vader theme going on instead of the William Tell overture.
I can tell how I'm doing when I'm listening back to the podcast and I'm editing.
Right.
I can tell where I was kind of in my body and in my head by the quality of the tone of my voice. I know when it feels right, and I know when it feels sort of off. Even though someone that didn't know me might not catch it, just because I do what I do and I have to listen to myself all the time.
Right.
God help me, right? I start. It's almost like I can like pinpoint. Oh yeah, that thing was happening that day, and I hear that stuff in my voice. It's such an interesting perspective.
And that's one of the things, people, and occasionally people go, well, you just want the copay, but I'll call somebody and say and talk to them, and I'm hearing something, and I'm like, I really think you need to come in, because there is not. You're saying you're hearing that over media, right?
Right.
You're hearing that yourself over media, but that's part because you are so attuned to that.
Very.
But the tone of voice, the body language, how people present themselves, the vibe of somebody,
right.
Nothing replaces that person-to-person interaction. So, again, I'm all for people being well-informed, but Google doesn't pay attention to that. Right? They don't,
or you.
Right. Yeah, they're not paying attention to the person.
Yeah.
And so nothing can really replace that person-to-person interaction, because there's such a wealth of information you can gain by, how people sit, if they look you in the eye, if they're, and it becomes a little frightening. You almost become like a, behavioral analysis unit profiler sometimes, that you're listening to people talking, you're saying, look, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, you're having an issue, and you're skirting around it. Please tell me. And that's usually an anxiety, depression. Guys, it's usually something to do with their sexual function. They get all, whatever. There's different reasons for it, but it's very important. And so that listening to the tone, you can just tell. And that takes experience, and that's part of the art of medicine. Part of why I like what I do.
I love that. That's exciting. I'd never considered that before, but it's the simplest thing. One of the things that I write a lot about is music therapy research.
Yes.
And I know from being in the hospital that when I was in pain, when I was on all kinds of painkillers, that I found it hard to ask a lot of questions.
Right.
And even to advocate for myself. Luckily, my wife was there. She could do that for me. My mother was there. She could do that for me. How could you help our listeners out there who are going into the hospital to feel less worry about asking for things that they would like to try, like music therapy? Because oftentimes you have to ask for that before someone's going to offer it to you.
Sure. And just as a preface, unfortunately, not every hospital would have a music therapist on staff, but that doesn't mean you can't bring in, AirPods and your cell phone, to listen to music. But so in general, certainly the patient should become their own best advocate. That's hard if you're undergoing an acute illness and you're under the influence of medications or you're not conscious to do that. So I tell people, especially if I'm giving somebody complex news, it may not have to be bad news per se, but bring somebody with you so you have two sets of ears and cultivate somebody to advocate for you, especially, unfortunately, in today's medical world and going into the hospital, it is not easy to do that, to advocate, and it is very easy to slip through the cracks.
Yes.
That unfortunately, that's why. I mean, that's a whole other podcast.
We could do it.
We could, in terms of
you're hired.
In terms of how broken our system is.
Yeah.
Right. But and I tell people if you do that, the person who comes with you, keep a diary. Keep track of what's gone on, who said what, not in terms of litigious sort of thing. I'm not talking like, oh, you have to keep track so you can sue somebody. But how does this evolve? Because sometimes it's even difficult for the physician to keep track of what all has gone on in a case. And in my experience, so since the culture of medicine has changed that hospitalists are taking care of people in the hospital, I used to do that for like 16 years. I'd do hospital and my office, and the culture changed so much that it was impossible to keep up with that.
Yeah.
So I have, since 2013, unfortunately had to pull back and just quote unquote, just do outpatient, but about 95% of medicine happens as outpatient anyway. But for somebody to come in with a record of what has happened is so helpful to me to catch up with them of what's gone on. The other thing is when people do come into the office, I encourage them to bring a list, okay? And I mentioned to you earlier at some point when we were talking, often this is on an envelope, right? And it's sort of like done almost just, offhand. And really, I think people should really think about what they want to talk about in an appointment. List it, but then go back and edit it. Okay, that's the first thing, because I've had the experience of people having like a list of like 18 things on them, and some things were like so inconsequential, like, why can't I keep my eyes open when I sneeze, right? I mean, literally, that was quite literally a question. And I'm like, well, that's because the way you're put together, and nobody can do that.
Next question.
Right. And the other thing is it's frustrating to the physician, and there's a lot of things in medicine to be frustrated about, but it shouldn't be about taking care of patients, right? But it's frustrating when you go through and you were taught to go in and ask open-ended questions and listen to what the person has to say. And then we go through our spiel and we go through labs or whatever tests. And then at the end of it, when you're like, okay, we're 15 minutes into a 15-minute appointment or whatever, and they say, oh, by the way, I have a list. And they pull out this like toilet paper roll of a scroll of stuff that they want to ask. Pare it down, make it the most, make the connections that you can. Have it edited, but be upfront about it. It says, okay, I have some questions. How do you want to do this? Do you want to tell me my labs first, or do you want me to go through the question? So, and that speaks to having that partnership, that relationship that's a partnership and a teamwork with the physician. So, those are the biggest things I think for advocacy, especially when somebody's in the hospital. Another person there to hear. If there's multiple people, like a children with a parent, an ill parent, keep the book at the bedside, and whoever happens to be there is taking the notes, is the scribe,
We did that. Tracy did that for me, and you're exactly right. It was so helpful. because we had different doctors coming in. One of our doctors couldn't come in,
Right.
and they actually looked at that stuff, and it helped them, to see what we were seeing.
Right.
Yeah, that's excellent advice.
Yeah.
Now, just a couple more quick things here. And I'm just interested for our listeners to hear this. But of all the things that you see, all the various states of health of the people that come in, really generally speaking, what's something that you wish your patients would stop doing to themselves? If you could pick one or two or three.
Yes. So quit. I wish they would stop being so hard on themselves, and realize that if they're doing something to better their health, anything is better than nothing, right? So somebody comes in and they say from one 6-month appointment to another 6-month appointment, and they want to be 20 pounds lighter and they're only 5 pounds lighter. Well, at least they didn't gain 5 pounds, right? So today's the first day of the rest of your life sort of concept, right? And take care of themselves more, not by being selfish. I'm not saying that, but what we talked about before: nutrition, sleep, recreation. We are human beings, not human doings, right? And I say that constantly to patients. You don't have to worry about doing everything. Be sometimes. And, in a perfect world, and I don't do this myself because, I can't say no, Jim. Okay. But in a perfect world, twice a day I'd take 20 minutes just to be.
Yeah.
And think and breathe and meditate or pray or whatever. And, back and forth between work, even though it's only a 4-mile drive, I have music on. One of my biggest faults is I'm too connected on electronic stuff, and I need, I consciously have to fast from that sometimes.
Yeah.
Things of that nature, doing things for themselves. And then the biggies, make relationships, be healthily fed, and rest, and do what you need to do to keep, body and soul together, and beans and rice on the table.
It's amazing how when those things are right, the day gets better.
Absolutely. One of the things, and I often say, trying to manage my practice and my work-life balance sort of thing is the big term now. It's like trying to steer the Titanic, right? Because it's like this massive undertaking to make little changes. But I find, and my staff sort of has behind my back a little bit, will schedule a short appointment before a longer appointment about 3:00 in the afternoon, because especially as I get older, I like to take the 10, 15 minutes and have a cup of tea and just stop in the middle of the afternoon, because I'm not really good at 3:00. My biorhythmic low is low, and you get a little short-tempered maybe, or just tired and exhausted. And taking 10 minutes to drink a cup of tea, Earl Grey hot, like Jean-Luc Picard, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And just do that. It's like, okay, yeah, there's nobody having a heart attack. There's nobody bleeding out in my office right now. You can take that time, because I'm better for myself and better for my patients, just that little bit. So it's not like you have to take this big vacation, or you have to, be out at, only work half a day. But doing those little bits and pieces for yourself during the day, there's sort of like having little pieces of chocolate during the day, whatever, just to make life go better,
I call that working the micro.
Yeah.
Take the 30 seconds.
Right.
Take the 5 minutes and really take them for yourself.
Yeah. Well, before we started recording, we were talking, and I had this back issue, and I've on some steroids to reduce some inflammation in my back. And it's been challenging because it does ratchet up the temper and the anxiety a little bit. And I found myself, even in this miserable weather we've had the past couple of days, of walking out the back door of the office just to take a few deep breaths of cold air. And okay, now I can deal with the office staff and patients right now, because I'm usually have this well in hand and I'm pretty controlled, but this medicine makes me a little edgy.
Yeah,
and,
the pain makes you edgy. The medicine makes you edgy.
So and being able to monitor yourself enough. All things are balance. All things are perspective. If you become too much of a self-monitor, like you were saying before, you read stuff, noophobia, I know there's something wrong because there's something wrong. But enough of a self-monitor that you say, okay, I need to do this for myself because I'm not going to be good for myself or anybody else, is incredibly important.
Yeah. Such good advice. I so appreciate you sharing that with us. This has been great to have you here.
Well, thanks for pushing me out of my comfort zone,
Oh,
Jim.
man. You're good at this. You don't even realize it. You're going to have a podcast before you know it. I'm just going to keep at you. People need to hear what you have to say. One quick question before you go. You and I have talked quite a bit about your love of Celtic traditions.
Yes.
And is there anything that you can tell us about how, these people from our ancestral lands, because we're both the same lineage, how they used music for healing?
Sure. So we have to realize that what happened in ancient times, in the current, in the current era, of, in the 900s or whatever, really is reconstruction. Okay, we don't have any written records. The Celts, the priests and philosophers of the Celts, the Druids, didn't commit things to paper. They or scrolls. They committed it to memory. So what we have, we're really reconstructed, but we do know traditions of the clarsach, the harp, in Ireland, especially in Wales, that it seems that the bards would attend births and deaths, that music ushered you into life and bid you farewell as you left this life. But in between those times, we know that storytelling accompanied by the harp was very important, and even the Celtic music that we still enjoy today, there are two main things: really raucous, joyous things like jigs and reels, and somber things like laments. And that speaks to the fact that the happenings of life were celebrated by music, right? So deaths and losses were celebrated in laments. Victories and love celebrated with other music, right? I really believe that our ancestors would look at us as if we were truly aliens from another planet rather than just aliens from another time. If we were asking them questions of like, how does music play a part in your life? They're like, well, what do you mean? It is life. It is just what we do. So, celebrations like the guitar singing on the front porch of the tavern, and, that image of the Irish pub of, having crack, as they call it. You're sitting around playing music, not the cocaine form, but crack, the gossip and the interaction and the song and the music is just part of celebrating life. We probably really consciously have to get back to that, right?
It's the fabric,
right?
And that's part of what I'm here to do.
Sure,
is to help remind us of that.
Yeah, you're sort of a prophet of the music, right?
Don't use that word, prophet. Get me into trouble here. Hey, Dr. Russ, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I hope you'll come on again. We have all kinds of things that we could talk about. And then I could coerce you into maybe starting your own podcast, and then I'm just going to keep on doing that.
Okay. You are persistent, Jim.
Well, the world needs you, man. The way you think about things, I wouldn't be surprised if we get messages from our listeners that say, oh, I wish he could be my doctor. Because my doctor doesn't listen to me, and you do, and you're special that way. So thank you for what you do.
No, I do appreciate being on your podcast. It's always good to be out of your comfort zone and stretch your wings a little.
It's good for your brain, if nothing else.
It is good. If not your vagal tone.
All right. Hey, take care.
You too. Be well.
Well, that's it for today. I appreciate you tuning in. Remember to come see us on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search Jim Donovan Sound Health. Now, before you go, I'd like to let you know about a free resource I made for you. It's called the Sound Health Newsletter. In it, I share the latest research in music and health in an easy-to-understand form. I also share beginner-friendly music and wellness exercises that you can use every day to feel your best. When you sign up, you also get discounts and first access to all of my sound health products and events. Remember, it's completely free. If you'd like it, just visit donovanhealth.com and enter your name and email address, and I'll start sending you new issues right away. While you're on the website, you can also read full transcripts of this show and check out a ton of other valuable resources. If you have any feedback, send me an email to feedback at donovanhealth.com. All the information presented on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Lastly, come and visit me on our Sound Health Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channels. I'd love to see you there. The Sound Health Podcast is produced by OmniVista Health Learning and Donovan Health Solutions. For Sound Health, this is Jim Donovan. See you next time.